Hello, I'm Sudarshan, a Starshine Star. Thank you for being here with me. I'm so happy that you are on this beautiful Saturday. It's February 15th, it's 2025, and I'm going to this will be the first installment of something unusual that I'm doing. I'm going to post this first installment here on my main YouTube channel, which is called It's the Dazzling of the Light, or just go to YouTube and type in at Sudarshana Starshine Star to access my well over 100 clips there. I have a secondary channel that I'm going to start putting things on, including this series that I'm giving you the first part one of, and it's also called It's the Dazzling of the Light. But you go to YouTube and type in at Sudarshana Starshine Star 99 to access that secondary channel. And I ask if you like this content to please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment. It really helps me out a lot. I'm super shadow banned. And thank you so much. I like to begin all of my clips with the 3 opening prayers. They're in Sanskrit and Telugu, and they're short. It's the Guru Mantra, the Ganesha Mantra, and the Gayatri Mantra. And this is to bless and protect, uplift and glorify you, me, and this clip. All right. Om, Om, Om. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parabrahmam Tasmahi Sri Guruve Namaha. Om Suklam Bharataram Vishnum Sishivarnam Chatubhujam Prasanavaranam Dhyaye Sarva Vignopashante. Om Bhur Suvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhago Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Naha Prachotayat. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Wonderful. Well, this is going to be part 1 of something unusual that I'm doing. It is going to be from a wonderful book called Salt. Yes, S-A-L-T, A World History by Mark Kurlansky, spelled K-U-R-L-A-N-S-K-Y. And it is really amazing. So I find it so enjoyable, and it's really well written, and I want to start to read it aloud in a series to you. So it's pretty fun. This is going to be the introduction, called The Rock. I bought the rock in Spanish Catalonia, in the rundown hillside mining town of Cardona. An irregular pink trapezoid with elongated curved indentations etched on its surface by raindrops, it had an odd translucence and appeared to be a cross between rose quartz and soap. The resemblance to soap came from the fact that it dissolved in water, and its edges were worn smooth like a used soap bar. I paid too much for it, nearly $15, but it was, after all, despite a rosy blush of magnesium, almost pure salt, a piece of the famous salt mountain of Cardona. The various families that had occupied the castle atop the next mountain had garnered centuries of wealth from such rock. I took it home and kept it on a windowsill. One day it got rained on, and white salt crystals started appearing on the pink. My rock was starting to look like salt, which would ruin its mystique. So I rinsed off the crystals with water. Then I spent 15 minutes carefully patting the rock dry. By the next day, it was sitting in a puddle of brine that had leached out of the rock. The sun hit the puddle of clear water. After a few hours, square white crystals began to appear in the puddle. Solar evaporation was turning brine into salt crystals. For a while, it seemed I had a magical stone that would perpetually produce brine puddles. Yet the rock never seemed to get smaller. Sometimes in dry weather it would appear to completely dry out, but on a humid day, a puddle would again appear under it. I decided I could dry out the rock by baking it in a small toaster oven. Within a half hour, white stalactites were drooping from the toaster grill. I left the rock on a steel radiator cover, but the brine threatened to corrode the metal, so I transferred it to a small copper tray. A green crust formed on the bottom, and when I rubbed off the discoloration, I found the copper had been polished. My rock lived by its own rules. When friends stopped by, I told them the rock was salt, and they would delicately lick a corner and verify that it tasted just like salt. Those who think a fascination with salt is a bizarre obsession have simply never owned a rock like this. Among the people who have apparently lived with such deprivation was the Welsh Jungian psychologist Ernest Jones, friend of Sigmund Freud, and a leading force in bringing psychoanalysis to Britain and the United States. In 1912, Jones published an essay about the human obsession with salt, a fixation that he found irrational and subconsciously sexual. To support his theory, he cited the curious Abyssinian custom of presenting a piece of rock salt to a guest who would then lick it. Jones states that, quote, in all ages, salt has been invested with a significance far exceeding that inherent to its natural properties. Interesting as important as these are, Homer calls it a divine substance. Plato describes it as especially dear to the gods, and we shall presently note the importance attached to it in religious ceremonies, covenants, and magical charms. That this should have been so in all parts of the world and in all times shows that we are dealing with a general human tendency and not with any local custom, circumstance, or notion, end quote. Salt, Jones argued, is often associated with fertility. This notion may have come from the observation that fish, living in the salty sea, have far more offspring than land-based animals. Ships carrying salt tend to be overrun by mice, and for centuries it was believed that mice could reproduce without sex, simply by being in salt. The Romans, Jones pointed out, called a man in love salex, in a salted state, which is the origin of the word salacious. In the Pyrenees, bridal couples went to church with salt in their left pockets to guard against impotence. In some parts of France, only the groom carried salt, in others, only the bride. In Germany, the bride's shoes were sprinkled with salt. Jones further built his case. Celibate Egyptian priests abstained from salt because it excited sexual desire. In Borneo, when Dayak tribesmen returned from taking heads, the abstinence from both sex and salt was required. When a Pima killed an Apache, both he and his wife abstained from sex and salt for 3 weeks. In Bihar, India, Nagin women, sacred prostitutes known as, quote, wives of the snake god, end quote, periodically abstained from salt and went begging. Half their proceeds were given to the priests and half to buying salt and sweetmeats to the villagers. And then it shows, there's an illustration here that shows an 1157, it's dated from 1157 AD, Paris engraving titled, Women Salting Their Husbands Demonstrated How to Make Your Man More Virile. The last line of an accompanying poem reads, quote, with this salting front and back, alas, strong natures they will not lack, end quote. And that's from the Bibliothèque Nationale. And it shows one man with his breeches pulled down on his belly with 4 zealous wives throwing salt all over him. Okay. Jones bolstered his argument by turning to Freud, who 8 years earlier had asserted in Zur Psychopathie des Altagle Benz, forgive my pronunciation, woof, on the psychopathy of daily life, that superstitions were often the result of attaching great significance to an insignificant object or phenomenon because it was unconsciously associated with something else of great importance. Would not all this attention to salt be inexplicable? Jones' argument goes, unless we were really thinking of more important things, things worthy of an obsession. Jones concludes, quote, "There is every reason to think that the primitive mind equated the idea of salt not only with that of semen, but also with the essential constituent of urine," end quote. Jones was writing in an age with a thirst for scientific explanations, and it is true that semen and urine, along with blood, tears, sweat, and almost every part of the human body contains salt, which is a necessary component in the functioning of cells. Without both water and salt, cells could not get nourishment and would die of dehydration. But perhaps a better explanation for the human obsession with this common compound is one offered a few years later in the 1920s by the Diamond Crystal Salt Company of St. Clair, Michigan, in a booklet, quote, 101 uses for diamond crystal salt, end quote. This list of uses including keeping the colors bright on boiled vegetables, making ice cream freeze, whipping cream rapidly, getting more heat out of boiled water, removing rust, cleaning bamboo furniture, sealing cracks, stiffening white organdy, removing spots on clothes, putting out grease fires, making candles dripless, keeping cut flowers fresh, killing poison ivy, and treating dyspepsia, sprains, sore throats, and earaches. Far more than the 101 uses for salt are well known. The figure often cited by the modern salt industry is 14,000, including the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, the melting of ice from winter roads, fertilizing agricultural fields, making soap, softening water, and dyeing textiles. Salt is a chemical term for a substance produced by the reaction of an acid with a base. When sodium, an unstable metal that can suddenly burst into flame, reacts with the deadly poisonous gas known as chlorine, it becomes the staple food sodium chloride, NaCl, from the only family of rocks eaten by humans. There are many salts, and a number of them are edible and often found together. The one we most like to eat is sodium chloride, which has the taste that we call salty. Other salts contribute unwelcome bitter or sour tastes, though they may also be of value to the human diet. Baby formula contains 3 salts: magnesium chloride, potassium chloride, and sodium chloride. Chloride is essential for digestion and in respiration. Without sodium, which the body cannot manufacture, the body would be unable to transport nutrients or oxygen, transmit nerve impulses, or move muscles, including the heart. An adult human being contains about 250 grams of salt, which would fill 3 or 4 salt shakers, but is constantly losing it through bodily functions. It is essential to replace this lost salt. A French folktale relates the story of a princess who declares to her father, "I love you like salt," and he, angered by the slight, banishes her from the kingdom. Only later, when he is denied salt, does he realize its value and therefore the depth of his daughter's love. Salt is so common, so easy to obtain, and so inexpensive that we have forgotten that from the beginning of civilization until about 100 years ago, salt was one of the most sought-after commodities in human history. Salt preserves. Until modern times, it provided the principal way to preserve food. Egyptians used salt to make mummies. This ability to preserve, to protect against decay, as well as to sustain life, has given salt a broad metaphorical importance. What Freud might have considered an irrational attachment to salt, a seemingly trivial object, because in our unconscious we associate it with longevity and permanence, which are of boundless significance. Salt was to the ancient Hebrews, and still is to modern Jews, the symbol of the eternal nature of God's covenant with Israel. In the Torah, the book of Numbers, is written, quote, "It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord," end quote. And later in Chronicles, quote, "The Lord God of Israel gave the kingdom over Israel to David forever, even to him and to his sons by a covenant of salt," end quote. On Friday nights, Jews dip the Sabbath bread in salt. In Judaism, bread is a symbol of food, which is a gift from God, and dipping the bread in salt preserves it, keeps agreement between God and his people. Loyalty and friendship are sealed with salt because its essence does not change. Even dissolved into liquid, salt can be evaporated back into square crystals. In both Islam and Judaism, salt seals a bargain because it is immutable. Indian troops pledged their loyalty to the British with salt. Ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans included salt in sacrifices and offerings, and they invoked gods with salt and water, which is thought to be the origin of Christian holy water. In Christianity, salt is associated not only with longevity and permanence, but, by extension, with truth and wisdom. The Catholic Church dispenses not only holy water, but holy salt. Sal sapientia, the salt of wisdom. Bread and salt, a blessing and its preservation, are often associated. Bringing bread and salt to a new home is a Jewish tradition dating back to the Middle Ages. The British dispensed with the bread, but for centuries carried salt to a new home. In 1789, when Robert Burns moved to a new house in Ellis Land, he was escorted there by a procession of relatives carrying a bowl of salt. The city of Hamburg, Germany, symbolically renews its blessings once a year by carrying through the streets a chocolate-covered bread and a marzipan salt cellar filled with sugar. In Welsh tradition, a plate was put on the coffin with bread and salt, and a local professional sin eater arrived to eat the salt. Because salt prevents decay, it protects from harm. In the early Middle Ages, farmers in northern Europe learned to save their grain harvest from a devastating fungal infection called ergot, poisonous to humans and livestock, by soaking the grain in salt brine. So it is not surprising that Anglo-Saxon farmers included salt in the magic ingredients placed in a hole in the plow as they invoked the name of the earth goddess and chanted for, quote, bright crops, broad barley, white wheat, shining millet, end quote. Evil spirits detest salt. In traditional Japanese theater, salt was sprinkled on the stage before each performance to protect the actors from evil spells. In Haiti, the only way to break the spell and bring a zombie back to life is with salt. In parts of Africa and the Caribbean, it is believed that evil spirits are disguised as women who shed their skin at night and travel in the dark as balls of fire. To destroy these spirits, their skin must be found and salted so that they cannot return to it in the morning. In Afro-Caribbean culture, salt's ability to break spells is not limited to evil spirits. Salt is not eaten at ritual meals because it will keep all the spirits away. Both Jews and Muslims believe that salt protects against the evil eye. The book of Ezekiel mentions rubbing newborn infants with salt to protect them from evil. The practice in Europe of protecting newborns, either by putting salt on their tongues or by submerging them in salt water, is thought to predate Christian baptism. In France, until the practice was abolished in 1408, children were salted until they were baptized. In parts of Europe, especially Holland, the practice was modified to placing salt in the cradle with the child. Salt is a potent and sometimes dangerous substance that has to be handled with care. Medieval European etiquette paid a great deal of attention to how salt was touched at the table, with the tip of a knife and never by hand. In the most authoritative book of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, the prepared table, written in the 16th century, it is explained that salt can only safely be handled with the middle two fingers. If a man uses his thumb in serving salt, his children will die. His little finger will cause poverty, and use of the index finger would cause him to become a murderer. Modern scientists argue about how much salt an adult needs to be healthy. Estimates range from 2/3 of a pound to more than 16 pounds each year. People who live in hot weather, especially if they do physical labor, need more salt because they must replace the salt that is lost in sweating. This is why West Indian slaves were fed salted food. But if they do not sweat excessively, people who eat red meat appear to derive from it all the salt they need. The Maasai, nomadic cattle herders in East Africa, meet their salt needs by bleeding livestock and drinking the blood. But vegetable diets, rich in potassium, offer little sodium chloride. Wherever records exist of humans in different stages of development, as in 17th and 18th century North America, it is generally found that hunter tribes neither made nor traded for salt, but agricultural tribes did. On every continent, once human beings began cultivating crops, they began looking for salt to add to their diet. How they learned of this need is a mystery. A victim of starvation experiences hunger, and so the need for food is apparent. Salt deficiency causes headaches and weakness, then lightheadedness, then nausea. If deprived long enough, the victim will die. But at no time in this process is a craving for salt experienced. However, most people choose to eat far more salt than they need, and perhaps this urge, the simple fact that we like the taste of salt, is a natural defense. The other development that created a need for salt was the move to raise animals for meat rather than kill wild ones. Animals also need salt. Wild carnivores, like humans, can meet their salt needs by eating meat. Wild herbivores forage for it, and one of the earliest ways humans searched for salt was to follow animal trails. Eventually, they all lead to a salt lick, or a brine spring, or some other source of salt. But domesticated animals need to be fed salt. A horse can require 5 times the salt intake of a human, and a cow needs as much as 10 times the amount of salt a human requires. Attempts to domesticate animals may have occurred before the end of the Ice Age, and even then humans understood that animals needed salt. Reindeer were observed going to encampments where human urine provided a source of salt. People learned that if salt was provided, the reindeer would come to them and eventually be tamed. But though these animals became a source of food, they never became truly domesticated animals. Around 11,000 BC, the Ice Age ended, and vast sheets of ice that covered much of the known world, including what is today New York and Paris, began to shrink and slowly vanish. At about this time, the Asiatic wolf, a fierce predator that despite its small size would eat a human if it had the opportunity, came under human control because its friendly young cubs could be fed and trained. A dangerous adversary was turned into a dedicated helper, the dog. As glaciers melted, huge fields of wild grain appeared. Humans, but also wild sheep and goats, fed on these fields. The initial human reaction was probably to kill these animals that threatened their food supply. But tribes living near such fields soon realized that sheep and goats could become a dependable food source if they could control them. Their dogs could even help in this work. By 8,900 BC, sheep were domesticated in Iraq, although they may have been domesticated in other places even earlier. Around 8,000 BC, women in the Near East began planting seeds of wild grains in cleared fields. This is usually thought to have been the beginning of agriculture. But in 1970, a University of Hawaii expedition to Burma, now known as Myanmar, reported finding in a place called Spirit Cave the remnants of what seemed to be cultivated vegetables, peas, water chestnuts, and cucumbers, carbon dated to the year 9,750 BC. Pigs came later, about 7,000 BC, because they would not simply graze on grass, and it took time to see the benefit of keeping animals for whom food had to be gathered. It was not until about 6,000 BC in Turkey, or the Balkans, that people successfully carried out the daunting task of domesticating the large, fast, and powerful aurochs. Through controlling their diet, castrating males, and corralling the animals into constricted spaces, people eventually turned the wild aurochs into cattle. Cattle became a mainstay food, consuming huge quantities of both grain and salt. The aurochs, fast-footed and ferocious, were hunted into extinction by the mid-17th century. Where people ate a diet consisting largely of grains and vegetables, supplemented by the meat of slaughtered domestic farm animals, procuring salt became a necessity of life, giving it great symbolic importance and economic value. Salt became one of the first international commodities of trade. Its production was one of the first industries and inevitably the first state monopoly. The search for salt has challenged engineers for millennia and created some of the most bizarre along with some of the most ingenious machines. A number of the greatest public works ever conceived were motivated by the need to move salt. Salt has been in the forefront of the development of both chemistry and geology. Trade routes that have remained major thoroughfares were established, alliances built, empires secured, and revolutions provoked, all for something that fills the oceans, bubbles up from springs, forms crusts in lake beds, and thickly veins a large part of the Earth's rock fairly close to the surface. Almost no place on Earth is without salt. But this was not clear until revealed by modern geology, and so for all of history until the 20th century, salt was desperately searched for, traded for, and fought over. For millennia, salt represented wealth. Caribbean salt merchants stockpiled it in the basements of their homes. The Chinese, the Romans, the French, the Venetians, the Habsburgs, and numerous other governments taxed it to raise money for wars. Soldiers and sometimes workers were paid in salt. It was often used as money. In his 1776 treatise on capitalism, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith pointed out that almost anything of value could be used for money. He cited as examples tobacco, sugar, dried cod, and cattle, and stated that salt is said to be a common instrument of commerce and exchanges in Abyssinia. But he offered the opinion that the best currency was made of metal, because it was physically durable, even if its value was as ephemeral as other commodities. Today, thousands of years of coveting, fighting over, hoarding, taxing, and searching for salt appear picturesque and slightly foolish. The 17th century British leaders, who spoke with urgency about the dangerous national dependence on French sea salt, seem somehow more comic than contemporary leaders concerned with the dependence on foreign oil. In every age, people are certain that the only things they have deemed valuable have true value. The search for love and the search for wealth are always the two best stories. But while a love story is timeless, the story of a quest for wealth, given enough time, will always seem like the vain pursuit of a mirage. And that's the end of the introduction. And I think that was a very excellent introduction, but you can't even imagine the rest of this book, how worldwide, I mean, there's so many amazing stories. It's really amazing. That said, I have to say two things. Number one, no one should ever be eating table salt. That salt that most of us grew up eating, the table salt, the, salt you buy in the markets, it's very, very harmful. Harmful substances have been put into it on purpose, and heavy metals and all kinds of things. Don't eat that. Find a good quality sea salt. The best salt is Celtic salt, Celtic. And, if you can find a good source of pink Himalayan salt that isn't made from China, because often from China, the way they mine it, it's careless and it puts other things in it. If you can get like a pink Himalayan salt from Pakistan or other places, then go for it. But I wouldn't take anything right now from China. Once again, the best is finding a good sea salt, and Celtic salt is the best of every salt in the world. It's amazing for many, many reasons. So the part two I want to say is the timing on these things. I really love this book, and I'm reading it because I think it has great value and entertainment value as well. It's really cool. But I'm not going to go into a discussion here, and that would be for a whole nother series of clips to do on YouTube and elsewhere, talking about how Earth is much older than we know, and that Earth is a living being and has many incarnations prior to this one that we call Gaia. And that is knowledge that is coming out now, and it needs to be learned, and soon it will be taught properly in schools and universities as the curriculum that has been so clouded and befuddled that has been taught most recently will be cleared away, and we'll be getting more real truth and proofs and knowledge about this wondrous, wondrous earth realm and the wonder of humanity as well. So I'm going to end this here now. This will be part 1. I'm going to put it will be here on this channel, and also, but I will be putting part 2, which is chapter 1 of this book called Salt, on my second YouTube channel, which I'll repeat is called, it's The Dazzling of the Light, but you have to go to @Sudarshana Starshine Star 99. My original channel has the same name, it's The Dazzling of the Light, but you go to @Sudarshana Starshine Star to access it. Thank you so much. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think about this Salt series. I'm very interested in what you are experiencing with it. And I close all of my clips with the closing prayer in Sanskrit and Telugu. And what I'm saying is, God bless all beings in all worlds. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. God bless you and yours. I'm sending all my love and huge hugs to you and yours. I will see you when I see you, and bye-bye for now.